Hey, I'm Konstantin Richter, the CEO and founder of Blockdaemon. Great to be here. Before I start, three caveats. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to change a little bit what I'm going to talk about because I want to talk about what sits underneath what Kane talked about, right? So we're going to talk about how to make DeFi fair and inclusive for all. I'm going to discuss it from the viewpoint of enabling existing institutions to enter into crypto and what that looks like. Second is I wanted to also let you know that I'm all over the place time zone wise, so I'm a little bit a little bit all over the place. We were in Asia last week, and it's been really, really interesting to see how the market responds to some of these things that we've seen. And then thirdly, I'm going to try and see if there's time for questions, if anyone has any. So in case you haven't heard of us, we're the largest institutional infrastructure provider in the space. Blockdaemon is, the word daemon implies an operating system running silently in the background. So if you haven't heard of us, it's a little bit according to plan. We run around 20 to 25% of outsourced global infrastructure in 70 different data centers. We run around 150,000 nodes across the leading 70 protocols. What sets us apart a little bit, and why I want to talk a little bit about how institutions can connect to DeFi, is that we're the only crypto company that has 3 of the top 10 global banks as major holders. And so we have a really strange, weirdly semi-crypto, semi-institutional sort of setup. So we have Goldman, JP Morgan, Citibank are major holders. They're also customers. And then on the customer side, we work with all of the leading exchanges and some of the largest volume provider and enabler and on-ramps of crypto. And so we get an interesting, we get some interesting insights. Our product stack consists of 3 pillars. The first one is access, which is transaction scheduling. So really anyone who wants to allow a customer to have a Bitcoin in a wallet and send it anywhere needs to connect to a network and submit a transaction into the network. And so what that is done via nodes. There's APIs for this stuff. We do, I don't know, market share between 50 to 60% here of global transaction volume going through a transaction scheduling API we operate. We have an independent white label staking platform, so we enable reward earning for institutions, and so there's a consumer product for Blockdaemon. Our customers, again, are the largest exchanges, custodians, anyone who wants really to make sure that they have strong secondary systems or a primary one. And so we also offer liquid staking for institutions. I'll touch on that when I talk about DeFi inclusion. And then we have an MPC wallet stack for self-custody. And the self-custody part is important because that's really one of the key premises of what crypto is about. And so how to enable the next billion users to connect via institutions to hold self-custody, right? So our product stack is built in a way that a company like PayPal or Stripe or Robinhood, who have a ton of users, can offer integrated MPC wallets to those users that contain key shards on devices and on a centralized server, so they can be retrieved over time. And so the reason why the time for us is now is that talking to these institutions, everybody's, at this moment in time, tokenization is particularly hot. But what we haven't seen in the last 12 to 18 months is a general reduction in interest by institutions to launch kind of a sort of semi-blend of a centralized version using crypto components. And so we see a lot less volume and budget spent, but we don't really see any decline in overall projects that are actually operated here. And so we expect a lot more volume to happen in 2024, and institutions are taking this fairly serious. The US obviously is a little bit of an outlier. It's interesting if you happened to be in Singapore last week, for example. I think that was the largest crypto conference ever to be hosted, actually. It was over 22,000 people in a venue. And you can compare this to here. This is one of the best events in the space in the US. You can see that the US isn't necessarily doesn't paint the full picture of where crypto is in terms of adoption. Now, when we talk about, so I'm going to get a little technical. And so when we talk about institutions, again, I'm talking about companies who have tens of millions of customers who might or might not want to hold crypto and send it around, or maybe even earn rewards. And so the current complexity for institutions is institutions, as you've seen in the last presentation, have very strong UX, really solid security, but they really struggle with identifying the right stack and path across these L1s, L2s in order to send transactions for their users through networks, right? And so in the current state, most institutions avoid interacting with anything on the layer 2 and SDK side. Mostly that's because institutions need to ensure that they know where sources of funds come from, and they also need to make sure that the nodes and infrastructure these funds go through are ultimately operated by somebody who could potentially be licensed. And so if you read the description of a money transmitter license in the US, it's any technology that enables any earning of anything that looks a little like a reward, right? So you could say that anybody who operates pieces of an infrastructure where there's a fee generated technically might have to hold a money transmitter license. If you have to hold a money transmitter license, you need to be an incorporated US entity, you need financial audited accounts, and so forth. And most of the, all of the L2 SDK layer can't provide any of this, right? It's just physically not possible. These are decentralized software projects, and they just don't function in that way. And so the current layer 2 landscape is a very foreign language when it comes to actually enabling these hundreds of millions of accounts that you see some of these entities having. The reason why that's a problem is because what layer 2s really do is they provide, in theory, the user experience needed for these centralized exchanges to function, right? And so L1s, like Ethereum does, I want to say 15 million transactions a day is sort of the cap. Obviously, when you look at that globally, that's nothing, right? Like the network would get clocked really quickly. And so these L2s, for example, that are EVM compatible, deal with that, right? Like they bundle transactions, they ensure that transactions are processed, and it looks like it's happening in real time. And so there's a huge gap in the current stack where there aren't really, L2s that work for these type of institutions. And so what you see is sort of kind of blends of both, right? Like Polygon, for example, is interesting as a network because it sort of looks like an L1, but it also really isn't. Or you can go and say Solana functions as an L1 that doesn't need an L2 because it has higher throughput. And so, but what happens for these institutions when we talk to them is they sort of go through this long list of different names and providers, and there's just so much confusion on like, what do we build our stack on? Who do we need to work with? Like, what are these things is potentially institutional grade, and how does that look like? And so the universe of software stack and providers for institutions is all over the place. I would say it looks really, if you guys, and I make the music example because we're doing the silent disco type of thing, is Pirate Bay, right? I don't know if you remember good old days of music downloads. You could torrent music, and that was before Spotify came, right? And so we're still in the Pirate Bay days of institutional backends and infrastructure. It's very early. The current stack is very poor when it comes to enabling these institutional on-ramps. And so I'm thinking how deep I want to go here. And so anyway, for us, we try to solve that problem at least halfway for these institutions, right? And so that's why our product stack looks like it looks. And as part of that as well, you have to really revisit all these different commercial models, because this functions very differently than an integrated solution that you might or might not see in a currently centralized system. And so there's routers, there's a wallet layer, there's an infrastructure layer, and at each point different fees and things are extracted. And so the other confusion for a lot of these institutional providers is that the commercial architecture and how to monetize these services is very complex. And it doesn't work if you just monetize one part of this system. And so the only way you can really run efficient and profitable infrastructure is ideally if you control all three of them. So you can have the flywheel effect of like platform fees and MEVs and licensing fees and transaction fees per ticket, et cetera, et cetera. And so all these also sit in between these different layers of chains that you've seen. And so that's just another real point of complexity. And so how are we trying to provide solution here, and how do we think a company that wants to help institutions get through that needs to look, is a little bit like an old tech company, right? Like, so one is you need to have a compliance infrastructure. And so for us, the main thing actually for any crypto company is audited financials. What I found really interesting when we set out doing audited financials for the last few years, I mean, it took us over a year to get our accounts audited. Once we found a really high quality auditor willing to actually do it and sign it. And so I predict that that's going to be one of the biggest bottlenecks, because once regulation becomes more clear, and if institutions want to enable that stack of users, getting crypto, like getting a company that collects revenue via partially in crypto audited is really, really complicated. But it's one of the minimum requirements any regulator will make, right? And so the other thing why I think that's so important is because currently, for example, for staking, I think as an industry, we've done a really, really poor job in providing transparencies to consumers on how to engage with systems like this. Because mostly, staking infrastructure is highly speculative. It's paid for, the nodes are paid for via fees that are distributed in tokens, which have a lot of fluctuation. And then there's huge lockup periods for different types of investors at different moments in time. And when these expire, they sell their tokens in the market. And without providing any of these transparencies, for example, I think it's going to be really, really hard for this to find consumer adoption, because consumers will always get front run. I mean, they do that too in the real world, but in this instance for proof of stake, it's fairly extreme. The example that a lot of people now are more familiar with, because it's in the press a lot, is Solana, where FTX sits on, 20% of the global supply, and it needs to get sold in the bankruptcy proceedings, right? And so if you as a consumer aren't aware that that's happening, then you can't really safely engage with infrastructure like this, because you're just simply going to lose out over time. On the tech side and security side, standard certifications is really, really important. Insurance is really important, and sort of very boring security setups. You want to follow the sun, you want to provide 15-minute support, all this sort of type of stuff that a company expects from a software vendor. And then ultimately, the main part for us is our full node management, API integrations and reportings, and they all need to be integrated and offer really, really holistic reporting specifically. And so, for example, the current stack for an institution wanting to allow their customers to hold digital assets is you probably use Blockdaemon, you probably use Chainalysis, you might use Fireblocks depending on if we provide custody or not. And then you might use another a data provider like QuickNode, and so forth, right? Talos, settlement system. And so but all these companies need to look like this here in order to provide a consistent stack. And so we find that there's maybe a handful of companies in the space that can fulfill these criteria. It's a very, very small market. I'm gonna not go. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about the wallet architecture just because it's going to take too much time. But yeah, and so, I want to end here and just leave you with, we have lots of complexities to solve. One on the front end, like we need to abstract complexity away for end users. But on the back end, also, we need to really build the infrastructure that allows for institutions who have hundreds of millions of customers to safely engage in crypto. And so there's as much work left to be done as on the front end side. If you're interested to learn more, or if we can help you figure this out, come talk to us. And look forward to seeing you guys around in the event. Thank you.